Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest, Sara Schulting Kranz. And she's here today to share with us her new book, Walk Through This, Harness the Healing Power of Nature and Travel the Road to Forgiveness. Now, did you know that spending time in nature can help heal past trauma? Today, our special guest, Sara, shares with us how to do just that. Now, many of you know Sara. She's a lover of the wild, a trauma survivor, professional life and leadership coach, motivational speaker, and certified wilderness guide. She specializes in helping those who have suffered hardship or trauma to find forgiveness and strength in their lives. Through her one-on-one coaching and guided wilderness retreats in locations such as the Grand Canyon and Pacific Rim, Sara helps those recover from trauma. A documentary of Sara's healing journey in nature is currently in production with the expected release date of fall 2021. So let's welcome to the show, Sara Schulting Kranz.
Thank you for having me on. I'm honored.
It's such an honor to have you here. My goodness, Sara. I mean, what a compelling book. Once I picked it up, I could not put it down. I read it cover to cover. There are times where I was crying, times where, I just want to throw it against the wall. But, in the end, it's such an empowering book. And I think that's why people are resonating with it the way that they are and connecting with you. I'm sure you hear this all the time where they're saying, hey, I understand this because part of my journey is your journey as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm only laughing because my own father even said that. He was like, this is a really deep book, Sara. I said, well, I've been through a lot and I think it's worthy of sharing those deep thoughts and the deepness that, how we can go really deep within ourselves. So yeah.
Well, why did you decide now was the time to write this book?
That is such a good question. Thank you. So, I had the realization that this book was going to come into fruition after a first trauma that I experienced at the age of 17, which I write about in the intro. I dive right in. And at the age of 18, when I was feeling like I wasn't heard, I wasn't believed, I wasn't understood, I had so many decisions and choices that were made, not in my best interest in life. And it was when I was driving home from college one day, I was a new mom, and I had this hit from above that you could call it God, you can call it whatever you want, but it was keep going. Your story will be known someday and you will write a book. And so when it was brought up, I've lived through many, many traumas in my life, and was brought up of publishing this book. Came out last week, a week after the elections. And when they said, does this time work for you? And I said, you know what, there's no better time. I did not know that we would be going through COVID and that I would be writing it through COVID. But it really gave me the opportunity to fully express my voice, my thoughts, and how to heal in nature and how to forgive, because I felt like there's no better time than right now in this world. No better time.
Well, if there's anyone that can share about forgiveness, it's definitely you. Because you've been through the ringer on quite a few things. And why don't you share a little bit about your story for our listeners?
Yeah. So I was 17 years old, living in a small village in the Midwest in Wisconsin when I was raped by somebody that I knew. I ended up becoming pregnant as a result, and I went to the police, and the police refused to press charges, even though I had to get a restraining order on this gentleman. I still call him a gentleman. Isn't that interesting? On this man. And I had I actually chose to birth my son. I chose to keep my son. And what's interesting is because the police didn't believe me, so many other people didn't believe me either. And I even had, when I was in the hospital, I even had a nurse come in and say to me, we're ready to take your child to foster care. And I didn't even know anything about that. I had no idea my child was actually being placed up for adoption behind my back. And so there was this time in my life where I really had to find my voice and realize that the first person to believe in is myself. Even when nobody else I felt was believing me. Okay, just so to make it very clear, my family was amazing. My family really were. They were the rock and the foundation of everything. My mom would walk me down Main Street in my village, and she would say, just hold your head high. People will believe you someday. Just keep taking every step forward. And that's how this book actually came into fruition with Walk Through This. I was 40 years old. Now moving forward, I went to college and met my husband, my then, now ex-husband, when I was in college. And I was 40 years old when I found out that he had been betraying me for 14 of 17 years of our marriage with men. And I had no idea that this other double life was happening within him. And the interesting thing is that the moment that he told me, the moment that discovery happened in my life, I looked at him and I said, I want a divorce, but I will forgive you someday. And for me, I know that it was my 17-year-old voice, that voice that I learned to believe so deeply in, that came forward and actually was looking at my 40-year-old self and saying, look, I was in so much PTSD, by the way, when this happened, but my 17-year-old self came forward and said, we've been here before. We know how to get through this again. And I'll tell you, honoring my trauma from 17, that's what allowed me to survive and to thrive and to actually become the woman that I am today, now at 47.
That must have been such a difficult journey, but I think it's one that many women in one way or another go through. So that's probably why your book is being so successful as it is people are they resonate with your story.
Yeah, thank you. I always say that, what's fascinating about story is that we feel that we are so alone so many times. And we're working on a documentary right now. And I said this in the documentary when we were filming in the Grand Canyon, our stories matter, right? And here's the thing that's most important to remember is that by sharing our story, we are allowing other people to elevate and to transform through their own, because through our differences, we find our similarities. And when we sit there and think, I'm on an island alone and nobody is hearing me and seeing me, and I'm feeling like I'm the only person going through this, through sharing, we realize that we're not. And we become so much more deeply connected through story and through our experiences that we've had in life.
So what really helped you get through these difficult, sections in your life and be able to walk the path of forgiveness?
What helped me was truly giving myself the opportunity to understand myself more deeply. So I write my book, and it's interesting because I know a lot of books, when you're talking about forgiveness, the entire book is about forgiveness. Mine's not. Mine is, there's an introduction, a preface, and then there's step 1 through step 6, which is deepening your understanding and literally really worthiness of self. Like when we've been through these difficult experiences, we need to understand what got us there, but to dive more deeply into who we are as men and women as well. And then step 7 is all about forgiveness, because you can't mindset forgiveness. You can't mindset life, right? To heal anything, we have to feel everything. And so in steps 1 through 6, which is everything from intention setting to asking, who am I? Who am I outside of this pain? Who am I outside of my experiences? Who am I outside of my marriage? And, learning how to set boundaries for ourselves and deepening that understanding of what are my values. It's so important. And so all of that work that I wrote in steps 1 through 6 is what allowed me to get into forgiveness, to step into that final stage of forgiveness. Because here's the thing, underlying forgiveness always brings us back to love, period. Right. And ultimately, that's what we want to get back to.
Did you ever come to a place where you confronted the different people that hurt you throughout your life?
Oh, gosh, many times. I actually made a list. And when everything came out of this with my husband, I went down and I had a list of people that I needed to confront, because I needed to also hand back the pain that was handed to me through these experiences, and to be able to look at them and say, I forgive you, because I love myself so deeply. I straight down the line, one after the other, after the other, after the other. And it was one of the most powerful things I ever did, quite frankly. I've never been able to face the guy who raped me face to face, However, if he was sitting right here, I would 1,000% be able to do the exact same thing.
That's pretty brave, considering a lot of people would probably have a tough time being able to do that, because it's a deep wound. And a lot of times I think people think when to tell somebody you forgive them, it's almost like you're letting them off the hook in some way.
I've heard that so many times. And see, that this is the difference, is that I actually look at forgiveness as keeping them held accountable more than anything, because forgiveness, I know in the dictionary it says to forgive and forget, which is this is why we need to change the definition in the dictionary, because words matter. In my definition of forgiveness, it's not about that at all. It's about handing back the pain that they've handed to you through this experience. And it's not about condoning the action, pardoning the action. It's not saying what they did is okay. It's actually allowing yourself to step into the freedom and peace that they had actually held you confined in this space, right, of hurt and pain. And I don't want to live there. I don't at all think that anything that has happened in my life is okay. My ex-husband and I still go through this every day, where I wake up and I choose to forgive. It's a practice. It's not one and done. And he knows that. He knows he is held accountable for what he did, because ultimately allowing himself to be held accountable, right? Allowing himself to also be held accountable gives himself the opportunity to then go and create better change in the world as well through his own learnings.
Did it take you a long time to work through the anger of what these different people did?
Yeah, it took me, it did. It did take me a little bit. I didn't work through my anger or process my anger inside, though. This is why I think that nature is so important, because what I would do is I would take my stand-up paddleboard. I'd go out onto the ocean. I would paddle with whales and dolphins. I would go for a walk and watch the butterflies, or just lay on the grass and watch the clouds overhead. When we are trying to process our anger in four walls, we literally start to ruminate within our own head, almost as if our head becomes the four walls. And so by allowing myself to go out into nature, I connected with something so much deeper and larger, so much bigger than my own pain, than my own anger, than my own, sadness. And through movement, we also somatically heal. So by allowing myself to sit in awe, to be able to walk, to be able to just be with myself, to be with nature, that's how I actually processed what I call the toxic emotions, right? They're helpful. We need to feel the anger and the sadness and all of the things in order to step into ultimate joy and freedom. However, we don't want to stay there, because when we stay there, that's also when we start to have disease happen and all of the things that, can manifest within our own body.
So I know in your book, you start off with, kind of set your intention and surrender. Why did you start there?
So I actually started with that childlike sense as well. So, setting an intention is so important, because when we are setting an intention for something, it's actually putting it into action, right? It gives us the reason that we are there. So every time that I would go into nature, when I was in my recovery, I would set an intention for, okay, today I'm working on the anger, I'm processing the anger of this person who had handed it to me. Today I am, choosing to really feel the sadness of where I'm at right now. When I also created that, when I wrote set the intention and surrender piece, surrendering to the outcome is so huge, because if we are focused on the outcome, we're missing the magic of healing along the way, right? The reason, though, that I also started with gathering that childlike sense within us is because within that step one is because allowing ourselves to also, as a child, we're so much more open to magic. We're so much more open to really exploring, and we're not afraid of failure. We're not afraid of crying. We're not afraid of laughing. And so that's why I also started that step with go back to that child within us and bring that child forward and allow that child to also heal you, to be with you when you're in this processing state.
That's so important, is to really kind of go back to where those old wounds are and
Mhm.
start to really work on those.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, when did you start? I know you talked about paddleboarding. Did you incorporate nature for a specific reason, or is it just that you felt better when you were in nature, so you added that to your healing process?
So it's funny you should ask that. So when I was 17, I would go and plop my little butt down into the cornfields and I would just sit there. Or I would walk along the creek, or I would, watch a spider weave a web. I was also an art major. And so I would focus on nature when I was in my drawing classes. And I didn't realize what I was doing back then was setting myself up for where I was going to be at 40. And so at 40, I just automatically had this realization of, okay, I'm not liking this being inside. And so I went back to what I knew, which was going outdoors. So I started paddling a couple of years before all of this happened. Allowing myself, though, to go outside is what allowed myself to find the clarity. So it wasn't intentional. No, I mean, it was just what I knew. What I also didn't realize until I started doing the research, when people were asking me, why is your recovery so fast? Once I started doing the research, I was realizing, oh, it's because our frontal lobe is always in action, right? When we're traumatized, we have the ruminating thoughts in the frontal lobe of our brain. We call that the executive brain. When you're in nature, that actually slows down. You start to feel awe, which is one of the number one the number one feelings that can reduce PTSD symptoms. And then the back part of your brain, the cerebellum, is allowed to rise, which is where we have clarity. And once I started researching it, I was like, oh, so this is why this is working so well. This is why I feel so much more powerful when I'm outdoors, when I'm in nature.
I know you mentioned this earlier, but you talked about getting to a place where you just really didn't recognize yourself and you kind of asked, like, who am I? I think a lot of women ask that during different parts of their lifetime. And it's a tough question for, I think, a lot of people to answer. How did you get to this place where it was a little bit easier for you to answer that, or where you have the confidence or like, hey, this is who I am?
What I did was I didn't fight it. Really, truly, I didn't fight it. I didn't search for the answers. I allowed them to evolve. And there were many times where I sat there wondering, who am I outside of this pain? Who am I outside of my marriage? Who am I outside of a mom? Who am I outside of a daughter, a sister, a friend? And when you're kind of forced, quite frankly, I was forced to look at all of these parts of me. I simply didn't fight it. I really went back to the core of who I am and started to evaluate, what are my values? What are the things that are the building blocks of me as a woman? And how can I build off of that, this new foundation that I'm now a different mom today than I was when I was married. And it gave me an opportunity to really explore, which to me is one of the most beautiful things you can do within yourself.
Did you find that there is a portion of this work that you did that really kind of dove into that self-worth thing? It seems like a lot of us women have
Oh,
this issue where we come to self-worth and it's like not good enough, not pretty enough, not whatever the thing is, you know?
yeah. So I've been working on that. I still work on that today, because when you've been betrayed so deeply, and also I was just talking with somebody last night about this, when you have been told over and over and over again that you're wrong, right? Or that you've been manipulated into thinking a certain way. Like, I would have hits within my marriage of something doesn't feel right. And I was manipulated or gaslit into believing that my thoughts and my intuition wasn't correct. And that, of course, and I would always hear, of course, I wouldn't do this. I would never do that to you. And so you believe other people over yourself. And through this process of every day really diving into my own worthiness, I now, and also taking responsibility for the times that I didn't listen to myself, I now am so spot on with the way that I live my life. And if I feel a red flag, I know that it's a red flag. It's really truly been, though, a process every single day of, stepping into worthiness and looking at it and really diving into it.
Yeah, it's so easy to kind of get lost in hearing those voices that say, oh, you'll never make it, or
Mhm.
you'll never amount to anything, you're not worthy of this, that, or the other. And it's interesting. It's something that most, not just women, but men have as well.
It is. And it's something that I that's why I put it in my book and took an entire step for it, because everything begins with self, right? Like self-worth, self-love, self-forgiveness. I mean, literally everything, even self-deprecation. And so by allowing ourselves to look at it and say, I'm going to feed the light within me. I'm going to feed the worthiness. I'm going to feed the love. And also learning how to break those past patterns of behavior that aren't only ours, but have been generational, as to what got me here today. Where even in my generational patterns, why do I feel less worthy today than I should be? Right. And so it's about all of that.
Oh my gosh, the generational patterns are a hot mess. So,
Oh,
you look at that and it's like you have people that there's mannerisms and responses and activity that happens that we've been just ingrained in, we just taught over and over and over again, this is the way that you do things. And it's so difficult to learn a new way sometimes.
it is. It really, truly is. And I will tell you that I think it's been the biggest gift for not only me, but my sons, because I have three boys now, 29, 19, and 14. And I talk to them about this. I talk to them about how our own generational patterns have gotten us to where we're at today, and how it's our responsibility to now change those, to shift those, to break those, to alter those, to create a life that is what we truly want. And it's no, looking back, I'm not at all condoning or, lessening my family history and family of origin. I love my family. It's just that that's not how I choose to live today.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I was so delighted to see that you have a chapter in your book on boundaries. And it's interesting because, while we grow up and we learn different life lessons, it seems sometimes that boundaries are some of the last things that we learn.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it though? I didn't even know what boundaries were when all of this happened to me. I literally remember sitting in one of the support groups that I was in, and they were talking about boundaries. And I went, well, what's a boundary? I've never even heard this term. Right. And so that's why I put it in the book, because there are so many people that are so confused by them as well. They think that they're for the other person, but in reality, they're for yourself, to keep yourself safe, to be able to grow more deeply. They're so beautiful when used.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, growing up, that wasn't something terminology that we heard often. And so when boundaries came up, it's like, yeah, that's what separates, Canada and the US. And it's like, no, that's not it.
That's not it at all.
A little growing up needed to happen there.
Yeah, I know. That's great. That's a good one.
Well, and so when you look at boundaries, what part of that is something that has shifted so much for you throughout your journey and your process?
So for me, the biggest shift for me has been the energetic boundary, because as somebody, I'm an empathetic human being. I'm an empath. And I know that a lot of people, I'm sure a lot of people right now are listening to that going, oh yeah, that's me too. And so being able to protect my energy and to be able to protect who I am and be able to say, this is good for me. This is not. This is healthy for me. This is not. I'm not letting you into my space and taking my energy, or, coming in to harm me, to hurt me, to do whatever it is, right? It's such a powerful thing for me, because I feel like throughout my entire life, truthfully, there have been people that have walked in and out, and I wasn't holding a good boundary with them. And when they've done that, they've taken my energy and a part of me and used it. And it's not okay. It's not okay. It's to protect yourself.
Yeah, it's so often, it's interesting as we learn and grow, boundaries and, just these different ways of being, those are things that we have to develop. It's, no one hands us a book except for your book that goes over like, hey, this is something to consider. And energetic boundaries are so important. So I was so excited that you talked about that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and then, the other thing is that sometimes when somebody is, let's just say like in a bad mood, or they're trying to project their anger or their sadness or their hate onto you, I don't want any part of that. Yeah, I like to sit in the light. I like to sit in the positive, my positive energy. And so by allowing myself to protect myself with that, to protect myself from those people that project things, is only going to strengthen my own happiness and my own joy.
So as you have, you continue to be on this journey. I know you talk also about judgment and practicing fierce self-compassion. Yeah. What do you mean by that?
That's been my word for 2020, by the way, which is really, that's why I put it in there as well. Fierce self-compassion is allowing yourself, when you are in that state of wanting to judge yourself, right? Self-judgment, because again, everything goes back to self. When you are being hard on yourself, questioning, why can't I do this? Or why is this not working for me? I always tell people, put your hand over your heart, just feel your heartbeat, close your eyes, ground yourself to the earth, and remember that we are all doing the best that we can in any given moment, you included, right? Feel your own heartbeat and remember that your heart picked you. And so going back to that space of fierce self-compassion will bring you back to that space of fierce self-love and worthiness.
Will that help also release judgment?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's always, everything is the foundation of love, right? And so forgiveness and self-compassion and worthiness, and it's always love. And so allowing yourself to remember, be compassionate to yourself, allow yourself to sit there. And when you're sitting in that space, the self-judgment, you're not giving power to it.
So who do you feel your book would help?
That is a good question. We are in a very traumatized state right now in this world. And so I wrote this book to literally help everybody. I mean, and that sounds really kind of out there, and it's true. I think that this book, even it's funny because I've had people who have said to me since they've opened it, okay, wasn't expecting to go into myself like this, and also know that it's what I need right now, because we are at a state right now in this world where, we have an opportunity to dive more deeply into who we are and to take this time to be with who we are and to shift where we're at in this lifetime. And so this book I wrote for anyone that is ready to do that, for anyone that wants to go more deeply into themselves and look at all of their past, present, and also where they want to go in the future.
So what advice do you have for just someone who has gone through a really difficult betrayal or kind of heartache? What would you give for them as advice?
Well, number one, you're not alone. That's the number one most important thing. And the other thing is just remember to take every step forward. Doesn't matter how big the step is. Like every step forward is a step to that next place in your life, and to believe in you. The number one most important relationship that we can have in this world is within ourselves. And that starts with self. So believe in you, believe in your story, believe in your voice, believe in your worthiness, believe in your own power of forgiveness for self.
Yeah, my goodness, what a great way to start looking at life. If you can actually believe in yourself and believe in forgiveness. My goodness, Sara, we could talk all day. I mean, I felt your book was such a great resource and really covers a lot of things that I think will help so many people. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community?
My website is sarashultingkranz.com. You can find me on Instagram at Sara Schulting Kranz or Facebook, Live Boldly with Sara Schulting Kranz, or my personal is Sara Schulting Kranz on Facebook. We're also working on a documentary called Walk Through This, a story of starting over. And so you can find that walkthroughthis.com. So yeah, and we're on the trail. You can find me on the trail. Stop and say hi.
Get a little GPS following you on the trail, right?
Listen, I was on a trail for 22 days this summer, and somehow or another people got my GPS. I have no idea how. And when the fires were breaking out in California, I was getting messages from people, and I was like, how did you even get my GPS? How did you do this? I have no idea, but people do.
Hey, well, all these good Samaritans looking out for you and making sure that you're staying safe and well. Well, Sara, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on. It was my pleasure.
Well, thank you, Sara. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Walk Through This. Walk Through This is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. And of course, it's available on Kindle. Again, if you'd like to connect with Sara, you can at sarashultingkranz.com for more information. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.